Good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Crawford, and welcome back to the Intelice monthly webinar series. Today, we have a really fantastic session here lined up for you on the dark web, digital risk, and everything that your organization should be aware of to assess your digital risk, especially in 2020 and as we get into 2021. Before we get started, just to make yourself familiar with the Zoom webinar interface, you'll see at the bottom of your screen two areas I want you to draw some particular attention to. One is the Q&A panel. The Q&A panel is where you can ask any questions, and you can ask questions to the presenters today. We'll get around to asking those questions at the conclusion, or we may try to sprinkle them into the content as we go. So please feel free to use that Q&A. And if there's any technical difficulties through today's session, there's also a chat window. You can click on that chat window, and I'll monitor that for any particular challenges you have hearing us or anything like that. Before we get started, just a quick sound check. Brian, Katie, you can hear me fine. We're broadcasting out okay?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right. So as people are coming on, we have a good crowd today coming onto our webinar. I'm going to turn over the festivities to my colleague, Brian Laughlin, who's a partner in Intelice, and then we'll get Brian to officially kickstart today's session.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Really excited to welcome in Katie Wallace as a subject matter expert. She's with ID Agent, and she's going to be talking to us today about really evaluating and measuring digital risk as an organization. And with all that being said, I will turn it over to you, Katie.
Absolutely, and thank you, Brian and Stuart, for having me here today. Like Brian and Stuart mentioned, today we're going to focus on the changes of the security landscape and look at the ways our information is exposed. With changes to our work environments, we've seen an increase in cyber criminals trying to profit from our information. Unfortunately, cybercrime, it's really run like a business where these cyber criminals are making money off of our data. Modern cyber attacks, such as phishing attacks, can be profitable for these cyber criminals, even with seemingly low success rates. The cost of launching phishing attacks are low, and a single cyber attack can yield thousands or even millions of dollars in revenue for a cyber criminal. So for today's presentation, I want to kick things off and really, look at how our information is winding up in the hands of these cyber criminals. The dark web is a huge marketplace for stolen data and personal information. After a breach or a hacking incident, personal information is often bought and sold on the dark web by, these cyber criminals looking to make money again off of our information or our good name and numbers. We may just ask, why not shut down the dark web if it's only used for crime? The dark web was actually created by the U.S. Department of Defense for whistleblower situations, and allowing sources to remain anonymous, because the dark web, again, was created by the U.S. Department of Defense. They were using the dark web as a way or as a vehicle for folks to come to them, again, in whistleblower situations to remain anonymous. And the dark web is used by a lot of folks in different countries with repressed speech who don't get, the most open news sources. Now, speaking of news, whether you watch your local or national news, you've likely heard a news story that's mentioned phishing attacks, ransomware, data breaches. Unfortunately, these opportunist crooks and cyber criminals are even exploiting the coronavirus as part of their attempts to gain access to our information. Outside of COVID-19 related attacks, Capital One, Equifax, Facebook are just a few companies who have been in the news recently for going through data breaches. Remember hearing about the WannaCry virus a few years back, targeting computers running on the Microsoft Windows operating system? The WannaCry virus, what it did, once attacked, it encrypted your data and demanded ransomware payments in the form of Bitcoin cryptocurrency. Many attacks don't have to be as notorious as a WannaCry virus to take down an entire company, though. Whether it's a phishing attack, a data breach, a hacking incident, there's something that all of these incidences have in common, and it's the human element. Today, your employees, they're your number one risk. You can have the best firewall in place, but all it takes for your company to fall victim to a ransomware attack is an employee sharing their credentials in a phishing email, or maybe your employee clicks on a bad link on the internet. In just one click, your entire network can be affected. To really paint the picture for you, here are some examples of some third-party applications that we all use in our everyday job functions. Given how many platforms businesses use on an everyday basis, you really don't have to connect too many dots to realize that you've got information that cybercriminals want and can sell on the dark web. Think about all the data that lives behind sites like these: customer records, payroll data, financial information. What happens to all this information once it's sold? It can be used for a variety of nefarious activities, from identity theft to launching spam or phishing attacks. Keep in mind, what connects us to websites and applications are our email addresses and passwords. When the cybercriminal gets a hold of your email address and password, they don't just steal your information. They can also use your email account to distribute malware or launch phishing attacks targeting your contacts, meaning your customers or even your employees. When fraudsters get a hold of email addresses and passwords, they also use bots or an automated process, and they start firing endless variations of that email and password combination on as many websites as they can. Just because so many people use the same password or similar passwords across multiple logins, it becomes highly possible that these cybercriminals can end up getting into your bank account using, stolen credentials from something like your coffee loyalty program. As we move forward, I want to focus on a concept like zero trust. Because of all this data and all of these websites that our employees now have access to, we've seen a lot of companies operate under the zero trust model. Traditionally, I think businesses think of data as like a castle and a moat concept. In a castle and a moat security, we trust everybody that works in our company or everybody that has access to our castle. And we place that firewall around our data or the moat, and we think that no one's going to get in there. And we think we're good. The problem with this approach is that once an attacker gains access to your castle, or in this case, your network, the attacker or the cyber criminal now has free reign over all of your company's data. And some of that data can be so sensitive, like financial information, even your employees' social security numbers that could live in your payroll systems. For this reason, the castle and moat concept, it fails when it comes to data security. Also, companies no longer have their data in just one place. Today, information is often spread across multiple vendors, applications, and different websites, which makes it even more difficult to have a single security control in place for an entire network. Zero trust security means that no one is trusted from default inside or outside your network, meaning a business is now looking at their employees and saying, if you don't need access to certain pieces of information, we're not going to give you access. Verification is then required from anybody to gain access to certain pieces of information. With this model, in situations of a data breach, an attacker wouldn't then gain access to all of your information. They would only get their hands on bits and pieces. We see a lot of folks operating under the zero trust model because no matter the industry or the company size, all businesses must adhere to certain regulations or compliance laws as part of operations. We should all be no stranger to data privacy laws. Since 1996, doctors' offices have needed to be compliant with our health records by abiding by HIPAA regulations. Just like medical offices, businesses need to be aware of any compliance laws they face. The state of New York, just wrote out the New York Shield Act, and they're now joining states like California and Massachusetts and having a government-mandated regulation surrounding how its residents' data is handled. Also, being negligent to these regulations can impose even larger fines in the scenario that your company falls victim to something like a ransomware or a data breach attack. As we move forward, I've talked a lot about data breaches, ransomware attacks, and even phishing attacks. So I want to get into some of these examples just to show you how real these attacks truly are on your business. What I'm showing you here is an example of a phishing attack. Phishing is an attempt to acquire personal information such as, let's say, usernames, passwords, or financial information via impersonation or spoofing through email. Phishing attacks have been on the rise for years, but as COVID-19 kicked off here in March for a lot of folks, the number of cyber attacks, it increased to over 5,000 in just one day alone. Cyber attacks continue to rise to where the point on April 6th that the FBI released an official statement. And that's what we're looking at here in this screenshot. Overall, 71% of security professionals have reported an increase in security threat attacks since the COVID-19 outbreak. As we look here, here's another screenshot of an actual phishing email that was going around related to COVID-19. Later in the presentation, I'm going to share some hygiene tips for spotting these types of emails. But as a fun fact, we have another example of a phishing email located right here from Microsoft, and Microsoft actually remains the #1 spoofed brand in phishing attacks. You know, phishing attacks aren't just siloed into emails. Phishing attacks have moved into text messages. You know, they're not as misleading as emails, but SMS attacks are sent by cyber criminals to obtain your information. The goal, again, is to trick you into believing that this text message has arrived from a trusted organization, and then they want you to take a convincing action that gives the attackers, again, your information like your bank account number, login credentials, or any other information that could be of value. I'm going to pause and actually share a story that happened to myself. I got a text message a few months back from an 800 number asking me for my Amazon password reset code, which I thought was odd because I had just got an email with that code as if I was resetting my password, but I hadn't, went through the process of doing so. So for a second, I paused and I thought to myself, okay, this is interesting, but I'm not going to do anything. And then it dawned on me that an organization, like Amazon, would not be asking for a password reset code as a form of verification for my account. In that moment, I realized that it was a cyber criminal who had been trying to reset my password. Amazon was asking for a verification code, so they were sending me this SMS text to see if I would share with them that verification code so they could reset my password and gain access to my account and all my financial information that lives behind them. That was the first time that I had ever received a text like that, but I think it's always good to share examples just so, in the future you're aware of these things that are going around. In this next slide, though, with phishing, whether it's done through email or text message being so common, I wanted to share these tips. The CDC recommends that you take at least 20 seconds to wash your hands to avoid germs. And we recommend that you take at least 20 seconds to avoid any suspicious emails and texts that you receive. Legitimate companies, they'll usually call you by your name. So avoid responding to emails or texts that use generic introductions such as dear valued member or dear account holder. Legitimate companies will not request sensitive information via email or text message. This was the one that saved me from having my Amazon, account being hacked. Chances are, again, if you receive an email from an institution asking to provide a link or a code, it's a scam. Legit companies, will also send emails from a domain. So if you receive an email from a Gmail address that's potentially looking like it's coming from Microsoft or a user, think twice about clicking on any links or opening up attachments because legitimate companies would not use a service like Gmail or Yahoo or a free service to send their emails through. As we move forward in the presentation, I want to highlight one last thing about phishing attacks. Phishing attacks and SMS attacks, unfortunately, have become very easy for cyber criminals to deploy. Now, I obviously don't recommend using this information to become a cyber criminal yourself because these are, again, highly illegal activities. But the phishing as a service industry has made it easy for these wannabe cyber criminals to deploy their own phishing attacks. Now, on the dark web, you can buy full service campaigns, including phishing content, to send out to your victims. As I move forward, I want to show you a side-by-side comparison of an actual screenshot of Facebook and a Facebook phishing site that a cyber criminal has created. As you can see in the picture, there's really not a huge difference between these two web pages. The main difference is actually the URL that you're redirected to. In my next example, I want to show you a phishing kit that is sold to mimic eBay. Again, with this exact screenshot as well, one of the only differences is the URL that a user is redirected to. So these phishing emails, they're become more and more realistic and hard to spot. And unfortunately, they're becoming easier to deploy with phishing as a service kits being sold on the dark web. As we move away from phishing attacks, I want to talk about the actual dark web itself. So what we're looking at is an actual screenshot from the dark web that our team of analysts has shared with me. This particular screenshot is of a website that sells credit card or debit card information. This is one of the most popular websites on the dark web, and you can buy credit card or debit information from anywhere between $5 and $110. So realistically, it's pretty affordable to go out there and buy this info. This is a full package site, meaning if you are on this website, you're going to buy the stolen name, the social security number, the birth date, account numbers, really anything that you would need to effectively use the card. Sites like this, talking about using the card, will even discreetly mail you the card itself, so you can actually take it to a store and physically use the card. Now, they'll discreetly mail it to you. So if you live in the suburbs or the city, your neighbors are going to have no idea what you're up to. And with cybercrime being run like a business and these websites on the dark web, you can even leave reviews for these sites, similar to how somebody would leave you potentially a Google review. And as you can see, they have right on their site, "Thank you for giving us the chance to provide you with the best credit cards." So they want to provide great customer service to their customers so they get repeat business. And it's just crazy to think that this business is run off the selling of our information. Now, with keeping to the theme of the dark web, I wanted to talk about something that's coming up. We have election season this year, and outside of our credit card, financial information, and customer records, voter data is just as much of a target for these cyber criminals. With your voter data, unfortunately, these infrastructures, they're poorly secured. Voter data can easily be exposed by a data breach or a hacking incident. And with these hacking incidents, unfortunately, personal information is exposed, such as political views, demographic information, first name, last name, address. And these breaches don't just happen on a local municipality basis. These are happening to states. In this screenshot, these are just some of the examples of a breach that I was able to fit on one slide. In 2017, cybersecurity researchers at UpGuard identified a misconfigured database containing the personal details of almost 2 million US voters. Again, this database included full name of the voters, their date of birth, home, mailing addresses, phone numbers, demographic information, and even whether or not you were on the do not call list. Again, with election season coming up in full force, with things being definitely different this year from COVID-19, I wouldn't be shocked if we hear about other data breaches stemming from the election. In this particular screenshot from the dark web, this website is selling the largest known data dump out there for just $10. This collection of data includes the records of over 2.7 billion people. AlphaBay was the site that was selling this database, and AlphaBay is a very popular site on the dark web. In fact, it was similar to eBay. Now, AlphaBay no longer exists. Authorities say that the site trafficked drugs, fake stolen IDs, computer hacking tools, firearms, counterfeit goods, and you could also go on the site and use their money laundering services. As a company, AlphaBay went so far to hire scam watchers to monitor and to put a stop to scams on their already illegal website. AlphaBay employed even a public relations manager responsible for outreach to users. And the site also employed moderators to resolve any disputes that had to do with payments on their website. I say this, again, just to paint the full picture about how these websites on the dark web truly operate like our businesses do. Overall, AlphaBay, took 2% to 4% of all commissions, and that's how they made their money on their deals. But the cyber criminal behind this account, unfortunately, was caught, and he had an assumed fortune of just under $23 million at the end of the day. Sites on the dark web, again, are run like things like eBay, Amazon, or even Etsy. And with these sites come along discounts. Again, discounts are no longer for the holiday season. and countless legitimate businesses offer discounts to entice buyers. So websites on the dark web do just the same thing. And to help turn a profit during the coronavirus pandemic, cybercriminal forums did something no different than regular business did. They were offering 15% discounts with using promotional codes like COVID-19. They were offering around-the-clock support as a way to help support their, again, buyers during this time. On one website, a cybercriminal added, due to the current situation in the world, we are providing a 20% discount on all of our services with the promotional code COVID 2019 until the end of April. Again, these tactics are used by cybercriminals to attract new buyers. As we look on the dark web, it's not just for your information for sale on the dark web. We talked about phishing attacks as a service. We talked about ransomware a little bit earlier on in the presentation, and ransomware is no different. Ransomware is a form of malware where cybercriminals attack your system with a malicious code. Their intent is to lock you out of your system and encrypt an important and sensitive data. Unfortunately, ransomware as a service borrows the software as a service model, just like phishing as a service does as well. And with this subscription-based malicious model, what are happening is cybercriminals have made ransomware something else that's easy to deploy. So if you are looking to buy ransomware as a service kits off the dark web, you certainly can. And ransomware as a service is something that's really taken off in this past year because it tends to be much more lucrative than an actual data breach itself. Undoubtedly, the advent of ransomware as a service contributed greatly to the exponential growth of ransomware attacks. The biggest danger of ransomware as a service is that it's made possible for just about anybody to become a cybercriminal. In this screenshot, I wanted to show you an example just because this vicious model is so enticing to some cybercriminals that you can even see that some ransomware as a service providers, they advertise on the dark web. Just like, you go on Google today, you type in a new product or a new service, then every website you go to after that, you see the advertisements on your toolbar. The folks on the dark web, they're using those same advertisements, but advertising, again, ransomware as a service, as a way to recruit these cyber criminals on the dark web. There are numerous reasons why cyber criminals are attracted to this franchise-like deployment. First and foremost, though, it enables the author to earn some quick money for that cyber criminal. What I wanted to show you here is just how lucrative, again, the dark web is. We talk about ransomware as a service, and who are the faces behind this? This screenshot is actually a job posting from the dark web. Modern cyber attacks, again, such as phishing, ransomware as a service, they're highly profitable for cyber criminals. The cost of launching these phishing attacks are low, and a lot of money can be made here. Having a proven, predictable business model has, enticed a lot of well-educated folks to becoming cyber criminals. Now, this job ad is for a software designer on the dark web, and the position has a starting salary of just under $765,000. And over the course of 2 years, this individual, if they stay as a software designer on the dark web, they could make just over $1 million. So think about it. If the cyber criminals are getting paid this much, just imagine how many hands your data is winding up in, especially if the largest data dump is being sold on the dark web for only $10. This is a large problem and a large space that a lot of folks aren't aware of. In the next slide, I mentioned earlier, hearing about cyber attacks in the news, and if you keep up to date with things, I'm sure you've heard about Zoom bombings. Since the COVID-19 pandemic has forced many companies to switch to remote working or remote learning, Zoom and other video conferencing services have surged in popularity. Unfortunately, Zoom users have become targets again for cyber criminals. There are several accounts that are currently on sale for the dark web or being given away on hacker forums on the dark web. Zoom themselves, they haven't gone through a data breach, but what has happened was, again, when COVID-19 really kicked off, a lot of folks were setting up virtual happy hours with their friends or their coworkers, and people were sharing their Zoom links in public forums like Facebook or LinkedIn. And what was happening is cyber criminals got a hold of those Zoom links and they started to sell them on the dark web. And again, cyber criminals think they're funny by just popping in these Zoom links and what they were calling Zoom bombings. Again, this is how these uninvited guests wind up in meetings. So think twice before sharing your Zoom link in a public forum, such as Facebook or LinkedIn. I feel like I talked a lot today about the dangers and the deep dark web, cyber attacks, ransomware, all that. But I want to kind of wrap things up on ways that we can protect our employees and our customer data. Major events like the coronavirus pandemic create new opportunities for cyber criminals to exploit. But these exploitations have been around for years. But smart defense will stop them. These tips can, protect your data in these uncertain times. Change your passwords regularly. Monitor your company's domains on the dark web or alerts that your company's information is being sold. Use a VPN connection while you work. Don't open unknown emails. Update your software regularly. Use multi-factor identification. Use work devices for work purposes. And at the end of the day, think about creating a remote work policy or even an email policy and a password policy to make sure that your company's information stays under your company and doesn't wind up in the hands of these cyber criminals. With all this being said, I want to turn things back over to Brian.
Thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate your insight on those topics. On a personal level, I've actually experienced some of those attacks myself, whether it be from phone calls, trying to get account information, or getting hit up on emails for bank account stuff. It is a very big challenge that we're going through these days, and really appreciate those examples and your insight there. With all that being said, we have a lot of mechanisms in place. For those of you guys who are our current clients, we have a number of mechanisms that are in place to prevent such things. For those of you who are joining as guests, would love to speak a little bit more about that. For anyone who did join the webinar, we will be providing an actual scan for you and following back up with you with the results of that scan. With all that being said, again, thank you for everybody for attending. If anyone has any questions and would like to add them to the chat or the question and answer module at the bottom of the screen, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Katie. Yeah, or if you have any questions, folks, feel free to ask away. We have quite a bit of time left over in our allocated time for our webinar. So if you have any questions or anything you want to ask either Katie or Brian, now is the time to do it. So Brian, you mentioned the dark web scan for all the attendees. How do they go ahead and get that? Is that something you're automatically going to do, or do they have to request that?
We're going to automatically do it and scan their domain or their email address, and then we will consolidate the results and then provide everyone with that information.
Excellent. And Katie, during the presentation, you mentioned the upcoming elections here in the U.S. And the people be vigilant on. Have you seen anything from other countries that in their elections? I know your firm works globally. How about other countries? It was similar type of behavior that you've seen in other countries for those people that may have been that are on the webinar from outside of the U.S.?
Absolutely, and that is a great question. So for the voter information, it's not something that's just siloed in the U.S. I want to say it was somewhere in Germany, and then there was also somewhere in Hong Kong that their elections were tampered with through data breaches that happened, through whatever software systems that their voters were using. Unfortunately, a lot of the voter software systems that we use, I hate to throw them under the bus, but they're not the most secure systems at the end of the day. So they're actually something very easily that a cyber criminal can get into, just because you think about it. The voter machines, they're something that are wheeled into these different locations and then wheeled out at the end of the day. So they're not always set up on secure networks, again, VPNs, things along those lines. So it's quite interesting, but to your original question, no, it's something that doesn't just happen in the US, it's a global issue.
Great. And the next question that I have is comes regarding the dark web. So if there's logins and passwords on the dark web that Brian happens to identify during his scan, is there a way to get rid of that, or is the only recourse really to take action, perhaps change those passwords or delete those accounts?
So that's a great question, and Brian, I hope you don't mind me jumping in here. I will say, once information has been found on the dark web, there's no removing it. Even if it is your social security number, banking account information, password, what we recommend in a situation, you don't have to go out and change your email address, but change your passwords. Make your passwords unique. The longer the password, the better in today's day and age. Something to help you with that, think of some of your favorite songs and choruses. Start to use song choruses as passwords with extra characters, just to make sure your data stays secure. Something else cyber criminals like to do, once your information has been found on the dark web, they'll use your old passwords and phishing emails as a way to social engineer you. We see it actually happen a lot from information that was shared in the LinkedIn data breach, and that was, I think, back in 2014 or 2015. Cyber criminals today still use those passwords and emails saying, hey, if you don't share your financial information, we're going to share X, Y, and Z about you on the internet. They use the password again as a way to entice you. And these cyber criminals, they're ruthless. So, again, once that information's been found, it's just something that you need to stay aware of and be proactive about.
Yeah, and just to add to that.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, just to add to that, I mean, we've had a number of clients whose personal information has been kind of breached in that same manner, and they are ruthless. They'll use things like, we've had control of your camera on your PC, and we've seen all the bad stuff you've done, and we're gonna send it to all your contacts, and we're gonna do, it's basically blackmail in all those areas, and they will kind of try to provide proof by providing a password from whenever they got it, to say, hey, we have your password and we've done all this for you. It normally is not the case, but they're just trying to get some money out of you. So I've gotten calls from owners, oftentimes owners of organizations, executives in organizations are targeted because of their position. It's known based on the internet and websites and all that kind of stuff. And they're basically being kind of held for ransom, or whatever you want to call it, being blackmailed to try and get some sort of payment. So it is very, very common. We've had it. Another area, I think, small businesses seem to think that they're not going to be a big target as much as larger businesses. And maybe that was the case, but now small businesses are being very much targeted because they may not have the same security requirements as larger businesses. And so doing things like multi-factor authentication and the dark web scanning and some of the other measures we put in place to reduce risk are that much more necessary.
And good point there, Brian and Katie. Thanks for your point. One follow-up question, Katie, to yours. You mentioned social security number being on the dark web. And you may not be an expert on this, but do you have any advice on how, should they go and talk to the Social Security Administration about getting that number changed? Because I imagine that could be a little bit of a nightmare.
Absolutely. In a scenario where, let's say, it's your social security number or even financial information such as debit card number or any routing number or whatever it is, you would want to talk to the Social Security Bureau immediately so they can put a hold or a freeze on your account. And same thing with your financial information. You want to go directly to your provider at that point and make sure that they can shut things off. That way, if a cyber criminal is trying to steal your identity or your financial information, that you put a stop to it. I mean, realistically, Brian, you mentioned something like dark web monitoring. With a tool like dark web monitoring, it's basically like that early warning detection. You know, it's kind of like lane assist in your car. With lane assist, you're driving down the road, and if you start to go out of your lane, your car beeps at you. Same thing with dark web monitoring. If we're monitoring your company's domain and your information winds up in the hands of a cyber criminal or one of these websites on the dark web, we're going to alert you that, hey, this password's out there, this email address, this social security number, whatever we find. That way you can remediate it before, let's say, you go off the road or your company goes through a data breach.
Great, fantastic information, both Brian and Katie. Thanks for everything. There's no other questions. So, Brian, I will turn it back over to you for any closing comments.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, just again, appreciate everybody joining. This is an ever-changing environment when it comes to security and protecting yourself and your businesses. So if there's anything, if you guys have any questions, please bring them up to myself. My contact information is on the screen here, or your account manager. And we'd be glad to help you out in any way we possibly can. So again, thank you for attending. Katie, thank you very much for being our subject matter expert today. And we are looking in future webinars. We're going to be looking to do some more cybersecurity sessions. Next month, October, is Cybersecurity Month. So we have some planned surprises there. So keep an eye on your email, and you will be invited to some of our sessions then. But thank you again, Stuart and Katie and everybody who attended. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Brian. Thanks everybody for attending. As Brian mentioned, keep an eye on your email. We'll have our next webinar series in the series coming out soon, and make sure you register once you get the email. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will shut down the webinar now. Thanks again.